Photography and videography have a shared common history. Each relies on the same camera settings to create an image, but each in different ways. And if you're someone that's an image maker looking to break into videography, here are 6 things that every photographer should consider before shooting video. Frames per second. The biggest difference with the jump from photo to video is the introduction of frame rate. When you're making a photo, you're essentially creating one frame or one single image. And in video, many frames are being recorded during a set time to give the illusion of motion. This is measured in frames per second, or FPS. Most of the time, the standard frame rates used in video in the United States are close to 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. 24 is considered the most cinematic since it matches the frame rate of narrative films, while 30 and 60 frames per second lean more towards realistic motion. Varying these frame rates creatively, such as shooting at 120 frames per second, introduces enough frames into a single second that footage can be slowed down and played back at 24 frames per second to create a slow motion effect. Constant shutter. Varying your shutter speed in photography allows you to make all kinds of creative decisions. But with video, shutter speed is directly tied into the fluidity of movement in characters and subjects. A loose rule to follow is always double your shutter speed based on your effective frame rate. For example, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, then your shutter speed should be set at 48 or 50. This doubling gives the illusion of normal, natural movement. Like with any rules, these can be broken if done correctly. Shooting at 24 frames per second and using a much higher shutter, such as 250, it introduces many more frames into the movement and gives a sharper, choppier look to the footage. Consider your lighting. Photography gives you the option of using natural or artificial continuous lighting, but it also allows you to shoot with flash and strobe units. When making the switch to video, continuous lighting becomes the only option. Because your shutter speed is now tied directly into frames per second, the camera could never keep up with how short a flash duration is. So make sure that you have ample continuous lighting when you start shooting video. Video codecs. Photographers are used to working with files such as JPEGs and RAWs directly out of camera, but with video, there are many varieties of recording formats to capture a large range of quality in your files. If your camera has a log or RAW mode, think of that as like shooting RAW for photography. It gives you more post-processing power than capturing in a compressed format. Make sure to choose the appropriate setting before you start recording. Lenses. Depending on what type of video you're shooting, the lenses that you might use for photography might not be the best fit for video. A fast prime with a large aperture, such as an f1.4, would make an extremely shallow depth of field for shooting in a run-and-gun capacity. Prime lenses will help in lower light situations, but finding your focus on a moving subject, it becomes much more difficult. Plan accordingly when selecting the right lens. A smaller aperture can make a big difference. Image resolution. Another restriction to consider is image resolution, or the size of your framing. The standard format, such as Full HD, is 1920 by 1080 pixels. This works out to be a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, the most common for televisions and computer monitors. Now, many output formats are a variation on this ratio, including UHD 4K, which works out to 3840 by 2160, or 16 by 9. These resolutions are smaller than the average photo resolution size, so be mindful that you won't have the same flexibility for cropping when you present your final film. Overall, video introduces concepts and rules that may feel a little bit restrictive to photographers at first, but as you get more comfortable with how the settings affect the moving image instead of the static one, it's all going to start to click. If you're someone considering the transition from a different medium, or at least want to take a stab at videography, I say go for it. Challenging yourself in a different medium opens up all kinds of new creative pathways. What obstacles and solutions have you experienced in the transition? Let us know in the comments below. I'm photographer David Flores. See you next time.